was just another Friday evening, and I was returning from my college classes, drained and starving. Deciding against cooking, I pulled into the drive-thru of the nearest McDonald's. It was the usual routine. Place an order, move ahead, pay, and then collect the food. Simple and mindless. As I reached the window to collect my meal, I was greeted by an older guy, probably around 40 or 45. The first thing I noticed was his appearance. Greasy, unwashed hair and a scruffy beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in weeks. His uniform was stained in places, and he wore a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I tried not to judge. Maybe he was just having a rough day. He started making small talk while handing me my order. His questions were slightly odd, commenting on the weather being as lovely as your smile. I replied with non-committal answers, attributing his weirdness to perhaps a clumsy attempt at being friendly. After an awkward pause, he handed over my meal with a lingering touch and said, "Enjoy your meal." His tone was normal, but his gaze lingered a bit too long. I brushed it off, thanking him, and drove away, eager to get home. Once home, as I settled down with my food, I noticed something unexpected and unnerving. Tucked between the fries and burger was a $20 bill and a napkin. Written on the napkin, in hurried, scrawled handwriting, were the words, "I like your earrings, by the way." There's more where that came from. And right below, a phone number. My heart sank. The earrings I was wearing weren't particularly noticeable, just small silver studs. It dawned on me that he must have been staring quite intently to notice them. Disgust coiled in my stomach, replacing my hunger with a sense of dread. This wasn't just some friendly small talk from a harmless stranger. It felt like a boundary had been crossed, a line I didn't even know was there until that moment. I threw the napkin away, feeling my skin crawl. The $20 bill, now tainted with the implication of that note, seemed like a bribe or a lure. I couldn't bring myself to use it. It felt like accepting it would somehow make me a part of something very wrong. I never went back to that McDonald's. Even driving past it made my skin prickle with unease. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being observed, evaluated in a way that made me feel exposed and vulnerable. This experience lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder that sometimes danger doesn't lurk in dark alleys or hidden corners, but can be found in the bright lights of a familiar place, served with a side of fries and a creepy note. Friday nights for me have always been about unwinding, which usually means a deep dive into Warzone until the early hours. This particular Friday was no different except for the fact that I had completely forgotten to eat anything all day. By the time I realized, my stomach was growling angrily, demanding immediate attention. Glancing at the clock, I saw it was past midnight. My options were limited, but thankfully, DoorDash still had McDonald's on their late-night list. I quickly ordered my usual meal, a quarter pounder with cheese, medium fries, and a Coke. Then I settled back into my gaming chair, eager for the arrival of my late-night feast. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed DoorDash. Picking it up, I heard a man's voice, gruff and impatient, saying he couldn't find my apartment and asked me to come outside. Slightly annoyed but starving, I slipped on my shoes and headed out. As I stepped outside, the night was eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of a dog barking. I looked around, expecting to see the familiar sight of a DoorDash driver, but there was no one. Confused, I wandered a bit down the sidewalk, my eyes searching the dark for the delivery car. Then I saw it. A few houses down, there was a car parked with all its lights off, except for the one on the driver's side. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out a figure inside. There was a man with a McDonald's bag on the dashboard. He was eating a burger, taking occasional sips from a drink, all the while staring straight ahead. His gaze was unnerving, fixed and unblinking, directed right at me. A chill ran down my spine. Something about his expression, the way he just sat there in the dark, eating and staring, felt off. His eyes had a strange, vacant look, as if he was lost in some unsettling thought. I stood there frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of the situation. This didn't feel right. Was this guy my DoorDash driver, or someone else entirely? Deciding that no burger was worth this creepy encounter, I slowly backed away, keeping my eyes on the car. The man didn't react, just kept eating and staring. My heart was racing as I turned and quickly walked back to my apartment. Once inside, I locked the door and peeked through the blinds. The car was still there, the man still sitting, still eating, still watching. Shaken, I grabbed my phone and reported to DoorDash that my delivery never arrived. They apologized and issued a refund. The car eventually drove off, but the image of that man silently eating in the dark and staring with those vacant eyes stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, targeted for reasons I couldn't fathom. It was a typical Saturday evening. My parents were out on their monthly date night, and I, at 17, was in charge of babysitting my little brother, who's 8. To make the evening a bit special for him, I suggested we walk to the nearby McDonald's for dinner. He was thrilled at the idea, and we set off, chatting and laughing along the way. The McDonald's was bustling with the usual weekend crowd. We queued up to place our order, and that's when I first noticed him, a man standing uncomfortably close behind me in line. I could feel his breath on my neck, and every so often he would brush up against me and mutter a gruff "excuse me." Each time my skin crawled a little more. There was plenty of space, yet he didn't step back. I tried to keep calm, not wanting to alarm my brother, who was blissfully unaware, excitedly talking about the toy he hoped to get with his Happy Meal. We placed our orders quickly, and I hurried us out of there, hoping to distance ourselves from the man. As we started our walk back home, I couldn't shake off the unease. Then, I noticed a beat-up gray sedan creeping along the road behind us. My heart started to race. It was moving too slowly to be just passing by, and every time we turned a corner, it was there, trailing us at a distance. Panic set in. I grabbed my brother's hand and told him we were going to play a game, a sort of race. We sped up, cutting through a baseball field to lose the car. I glanced back, and to my relief, the sedan didn't follow us onto the field. We made it home, and I locked the door immediately, double-checking every window. My brother, oblivious to my panic, happily dug into his meal, chattering about how much fun he had racing home. I tried to respond with equal enthusiasm, but my eyes kept darting to the windows, scanning for that gray sedan. Every car that passed made me jump. I was counting down the minutes until my parents would be home. The feeling of being watched followed. It was suffocating. I couldn't shake off the image of the man in the queue in the car that followed us. When my parents finally came home, I've never felt more relieved. I didn't mention what happened. I didn't want to worry them or admit how scared I was. But that night, as I lay in bed, every little sound made me tense. The image of the gray sedan lurking in the shadows lingered in my mind. I was 19, working late shifts at McDonald's to save up for college. It was one of those slow Tuesday nights, the kind where the hum of the fryers becomes a lullaby. That's when he walked in, a man mid-40s with a haggard look and a coat that seemed too heavy for the season. He ordered a coffee, his voice raspy, and picked the corner booth that faced the counter. Something about him set off alarm bells in my mind, but I brushed it off, attributing it to late-night jitters. As the night dragged on, I noticed him staring at me. Not the usual customer glance, but a piercing, unblinking stare that made my skin crawl. Every time I looked up, our eyes would meet, and he would offer a crooked, unsettling smile. Closing time was near, and the man was still there, nursing the same cup of coffee. My coworker Jake noticed my discomfort and offered to walk me to my car. But when we started closing up, the man finally stood up. He shuffled toward me, his hands deep in his coat pockets. "Thanks for the service," he muttered, but his eyes, cold and calculating, never left mine. He was too close, his breath foul, and I felt trapped behind the counter. Then, as if on cue, Jake came out from the back, and the man quickly left, his heavy steps echoing through the empty restaurant. I never saw him again after that night, but the memory of his stare, that feeling of being hunted, lingered long after. I quit my late shift soon after. It was a regular Saturday afternoon at McDonald's, the place bustling with families and teenagers. I was there for my usual weekend treat, a McFlurry and some fries. While waiting in line, I couldn't help but notice a man sitting alone at a nearby table. He was middle-aged, unkempt, with a wild look in his eyes. Something about him seemed off, but I tried to focus on my order. After getting my food, I chose a seat far from him, near the play area where kids' laughter filled the air. I was halfway through my McFlurry when I felt a presence looming over me. Looking up, my heart sank. It was the man, staring down at me with an unsettling grin. "Enjoying your meal?" he asked in a raspy voice. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. I mumbled a quick yes and hoped he would leave, but he didn't. Instead, he pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. My mind raced with panic. His behavior was bizarre, and every instinct told me this situation wasn't right. I texted a friend who was supposed to meet me, hoping she'd arrive soon. The man started rambling about random things, his speech erratic. I nodded and pretended to listen, all the while scanning the restaurant for an employee or anyone who might notice my discomfort. Thankfully, my friend arrived minutes later. Seeing her, I quickly gathered my things, telling the man I had to leave. As I walked away with her, I glanced back. He was still sitting there, watching me leave with that same eerie grin. I never returned to that McDonald's. The memory of that man's intense stare and unsettling presence haunted me for weeks.